Marilyn Carter had lived through 66 years of quiet routines, early morning coffee, and the soft certainty of her husband's presence beside her. When Robert died, that certainty disappeared overnight. Their house in Des Moines, once filled with small domestic sounds, seemed to echo with absence. She moved through the rooms like someone walking through a museum of her own life, touching objects not because she needed them, but because they reminded her of him. His jacket still hung in the hallway. His handwriting still marked the calendar. The silence felt heavier than grief itself. 3 months after the funeral, while sorting through Robert's files, something she had avoided until she no longer could, Marilyn found an envelope she didn't recognize. Inside were the documents for a life insurance policy Robert had maintained in secret for years. $650,000. His signature appeared on every page, every date, every amendment. It felt like he was reaching out from the other side, leaving her one final act of protection. She pressed the papers to her chest as tears blurred the numbers. Robert had always been the steady one, the planner. Even in death, he was still looking after her. The discovery didn't erase the loneliness, but it softened it. With that money came a possibility, one she and Robert had whispered about on quiet Sunday mornings. They had dreamed of a small farm somewhere in the Midwest, a place with open fields, a slow breeze, and space to breathe. A place where evenings belonged to sunsets instead of traffic, where mornings began with dew on the grass instead of emails and deadlines. They had promised each other that one day, when they retired, they would find that place. Marilyn decided that one day had come. She drove through Madison County a week later, following Robert's old notes about the small towns he loved. Rolling hills unfolded around her, dotted with barns and fences that had stood for generations. The farther she drove from the city, the lighter her chest felt. When she reached the farmhouse, a white 2-story home with weathered shutters and 10 acres of open land, she knew immediately. It wasn't perfect. The porch railings needed paint. The barn roof sagged slightly and the gravel driveway was cracked. But she could imagine Robert standing on that porch, looking at the fields and saying, "This is it, Marilyn. This is the place." The price was $420,000, exactly the kind of modest listing Robert used to show her in magazines. She signed the offer without hesitation. For the first time since the funeral, her hands trembled, not from grief, but from something close to hope. When she moved in, the house smelled of fresh wood and possibility. She stood in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counters, imagining Robert smiling at her choices, the farm, the courage, the new beginning. That afternoon, she picked up her phone and dialed her son. Eric answered on the 3rd ring. Mum. Everything okay? Marilyn felt her heart lift with a fragile kind of excitement. Yes, she said softly. I have wonderful news. Eric didn't respond the way Marilyn imagined a son would. At first, there was a pause, just long enough for her to think maybe he was surprised in a good way. Then came the confusion. A farm? What do you mean, Mom? You bought a farm. Marilyn smiled, trying to hold on to the warmth she had carried all afternoon. Yes, sweetheart, in Madison County. It's exactly the kind of place your father and I always dreamed of. The life insurance, money covered everything. I think your dad would have wanted. Eric cut her off. His voice sharpened. You spent the insurance money? All of it. Marilyn froze, her fingers tightening around the phone. Eric, it was a gift from your father. He left it so I'd be secure. The house is perfect and unbelievable, he snapped. The confusion caved in, giving way to anger, thick, rising anger she hadn't expected. Do you know what we could have done with that money? Melanie and I had plans, real plans. You should have talked to me first. She blinked at the kitchen wall, struggling to understand. Talk to you? Eric, it was Robert's policy. For me. Your father? For you, he repeated, almost laughing. Mom, come on. You don't need a farm. You don't need anything that big. But I have a family responsibilities. That money should have gone toward something useful. The entitlement in his voice stung like a slap. Marilyn swallowed, each word harder than the last. Your father wanted me to be comfortable, and I want you to visit. I thought you might be happy for me. Visit? Eric scoffed. Yeah, fine. We'll come next weekend. Me, Melanie, her parents, and a few friends. They've been asking about the place since I told them. Marilyn tried to picture it. A warm visit, laughter, maybe a family meal, but something in his tone darkened. Then his voice dropped, cold and sharp. But listen carefully. You will sleep in the garage while we're there. She almost didn't register the words. The garage? Yes. The place needs space for guests. And you're not going to embarrass Melanie's parents by wandering around like you always do. Stay out of the way. Don't start crying. Don't ramble. Don't make this awkward. The kitchen seemed to tilt around her. Eric, she whispered, why would I embarrass anyone? This is my home. Not if you make a scene, he said. If you do, I swear to God. Mom, I'll put you in a nursing home so fast you won't know what happened. Do you understand me? The threat dropped into her stomach like a stone. She didn't remember ending the call. She only remembered the silence afterward, the same silence she had lived with since Robert died, but somehow heavier now, crueler. She sat at the small wooden table of her new kitchen, the one she had chosen because the morning light fell so gently across it. Now it felt cold, foreign, as if the joy she carried into this house earlier had been ripped out and thrown onto the floor. Her hands shook. Her breath wavered. She lowered her head onto the table and let the heartbreak move through her. Slow, sharp, merciless. The farm had felt like a beginning. Now, it already felt like something that could be taken from her. Marilyn spent the next morning doing what Eric had ordered, moving slowly through the motions as if her body and mind no longer belonged to each other. She cleared space in the garage, dragging old boxes to one corner, sweeping dust into small gray piles, and laying down a thin blanket on the cot she had stored there when she first moved in. Every action felt mechanical. Shame pressed against her ribs with every breath. She had bought this farm with hope, with love for the life she once shared with Robert. Now she was preparing a cold, drafty garage as if she were an unwanted guest in her own home. The garage smelled faintly of old paint and machine oil. As she rearranged a small shelf, she noticed an object behind a stack of cardboard boxes, a beige landline phone, the kind that had been common decades earlier. Curious, she lifted it, brushing away a layer of dust. The cord was still intact, and the line was plugged into a wall jack. She hadn't even realized the garage had a phone connection. She picked up the receiver, more out of habit than purpose. There was a faint dial tone. That surprised her. She thought she had only set up phone service in the main house. She placed the receiver back down, assuming the previous owners had wired multiple extensions throughout the property. Later that afternoon, while unpacking a crate of Robert's old tools, the phone suddenly rang. Marilyn startled, hesitating before lifting the receiver. As soon as she did, she heard voices. Eric's first, harsh and unmistakably irritated. Then Melanie's lighter, mocking tone. Marilyn realized too late that she had picked up the call at the same time as the house phone. They didn't know she could hear them. Did you talk to her? Melanie asked. Yeah, Eric replied. She bought the stupid farm. She's completely lost it. Melanie laughed. She really thinks she can live there alone? God, she's pathetic. Marilyn felt the blood drain from her face. She's a burden, Eric continued. Always has been. But she's easy to control. She always folds when you push hard enough. Melanie hummed. So the plan's still on. Of course it is, Eric said. I already talked to Dr. Keenan. $7,000. And he'll say whatever we need. Once he signs off, we file to get her declared mentally incompetent. And then the nursing home. The cheapest one, he said flatly. I don't care if it smells like mildew. She won't be there long anyway. Melanie exhaled, satisfied. And the farm? Eric's tone sharpened with excitement. We'll list it for $750. Nobody needs to know. She only paid $420. Once she's out of the picture, I'll be named conservator, and we can finally get something out of all of this. Melanie whispered, Good. She owes you. Owes me. Eric scoffed. She owes me everything. Marilyn couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded so loudly she was afraid they might hear it through the line. She stayed perfectly still, the cold plastic of the receiver pressed against her ear. Unable to hang up, unable to move. Every word landed like a blow. Pathetic, burden, incompetent nursing home conservatorship. Each one stripping another layer of safety from her world. Her own son wasn't just angry. He wasn't just entitled. He was preparing to erase her. And in that terror, something inside her shifted. Not strength, at least not yet, but awareness. A sharp awakening. A cold understanding she could no longer ignore. Her son was planning to take everything from her, and she was completely, devastatingly alone. After hearing her son's voice drip with calculation and cruelty, Marilyn felt something collapse inside her, a soft, painful folding of the heart. She hung up the phone without remembering how, her hands trembling so violently she had to steady herself against a workbench. The garage walls felt as if they were closing in. She needed air. She needed answers. She needed Robert. She walked back into the house, moving on instinct, climbing the stairs to the spare room where she had stored the last unopened boxes of her husband's belongings. She had been avoiding them for months. They felt sacred, his handwriting, his shirts that still carried a faint scent of cedar, the notebooks he used to fill with neat, careful lines. But now they felt necessary. If there was any clarity left in her world, it was buried somewhere in Robert's things. Marilyn knelt beside the stack and opened the first box. Old jackets, a watch, a pair of reading glasses she had forgotten he broke months before he died. She kept digging, box after box, her breath tight, her fingers shaking. Then she found a manila folder wedged between two binders. A handwritten label stretched across the front. Eric, confidential. Marilyn froze. Her heart stuttered painfully. Robert never hid things from her. At least she had believed he didn't. She opened the folder. Inside was a thick stack of printed emails, handwritten notes, even torn pages from a checkbook ledger. Each document told the same story. Eric asking for money again and again. The first loan was small. Then another. Then more. The requests grew bolder. The excuses grew thinner. Over 5 years, the total reached $120,000, and not a single repayment followed. Robert had written notes in the margins, quiet observations, frustration he never voiced, warnings he never dared to speak. He promised he would pay it back. He said I was choosing money over my own son. He threatened to cut us off if I refused. I am wedded. He's not the boy we raised. Several pages later, the handwriting changed. Smoother, more resigned. Marilyn doesn't know. I can't burden her with this. She'll blame herself. He lies without hesitation. He scares me sometimes. At the bottom of the folder, one last envelope lay sealed but unmailed. Her name was on the front. She opened it with shaking fingers. Robert had written, My dearest Marilyn, I've tried to talk to Eric. I've tried to believe he'll change, but he manipulates, lies, and turns every conversation into guilt. I hid the truth to protect you. Please be careful. He may hurt you when I'm gone. Marilyn pressed the letter to her chest, tears slipping down her face, not just from heartbreak, but from the brutal clarity of it. Robert had known. He had tried to shield her even as he was dying. She was still kneeling on the floor when she saw headlights sweep across the window, bright, intrusive, unexpected. A car, door slammed. Another. Laughter. Footsteps on gravel. Eric and Melanie had arrived. A full day early. Eric didn't bother knocking. He pushed the front door open as if the house already belonged to him, Melanie trailing behind with a bright, performative smile. They moved from room to room with the casual possession of realtors evaluating a new listing. Eric ran his hand along the banister. Melanie tapped walls with her knuckles. Every comment felt like a tiny erasure of Marilyn's existence. "We'll have to redo this whole hallway," Eric murmured. "The lighting is terrible." Melanie pointed at the living room. "And these floors will stain them darker. Much more modern." Marilyn stood at the edge of the room, arms folded gently across her stomach, trying to keep her breathing steady. She told them she was resting when they arrived. It wasn't a lie. She had been on the floor of the spare room reading Robert's letter, trying to stop the world from tilting. But the truth behind her exhaustion was something she couldn't let them see. Fear, pain, and now the sharp beginning of anger. She excused herself and retreated to the garage, pretending she needed to finish organizing her sleeping space. In reality, she needed the distance, the quiet, the chance to steady her hands. But the silence didn't last long. A horn sounded outside, then another. Marilyn peered out the small garage window as a gleaming luxury SUV rolled up the driveway, headlights slicing through the dusk. Two couples climbed out, followed by Melanie's parents, dressed elegantly, carrying wine and gifts, their expressions full of admiration. "Oh, it's beautiful," Melanie's mother exclaimed. "So picturesque. The porch, the fields, like something from a postcard." Eric beamed, taking credit for what he had never touched. "Yeah, we found it for a great price. Incredible value for what it is." He waved Marilyn in without looking at her, as if summoning staff. "Mom, come on. We need dinner for 8. Something simple but presentable." Marilyn felt the sting, but nodded. She tied on an apron, moved through the kitchen with practiced hands, preparing roast chicken, vegetables, and bread. Her body remembered what to do even as her heart felt hollow. When she stepped into the dining room to deliver the food, Eric's face tightened. "Mom, what are you wearing?" he hissed under his breath. "You look like a mess. Couldn't you at least try?" The humiliation hit hard. Her shirt was clean, her hair brushed, but none of it mattered. The point wasn't appearance, it was dominance. She carried the platters to the table quietly, then slipped back toward the kitchen. Before she could step away, she heard Melanie speaking in a sympathetic, practiced voice. "It's been hard," Melanie said. "Since Robert passed, she's not herself. We've been taking care of her. She forgets things, makes impulsive decisions." Eric added, "Buying the farm was a mistake. She's not stable enough to manage something like this." Melanie nodded solemnly. "But we're doing our best. Family first." Marilyn stood in the hallway, unseen, her hands tightening around a dish towel until her knuckles whitened. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, something else began to rise. A slow, steady warmth. Not rage. Not yet. Resolve. If they wanted to strip her of dignity, they had underestimated how much she still had left. The dining room glowed with warm light, the kind meant to make guests feel welcome. Yet Marilyn sat in her own home, feeling like a shadow, quiet, small, reduced to the background while Eric took center stage. The long wooden table was crowded with dishes she had prepared, glasses of wine she had poured, and voices that barely acknowledged her presence. Melanie's mother dabbed her lips with a linen napkin. "Eric, it's admirably the way you're stepping up for your mother. Not every son would." Eric leaned back in his chair, smiling with the practiced humility of someone who enjoyed applause far too much. "Well, someone has to keep an eye on her. It's been tough since Dad passed." "Tough on you," Melanie added, touching his arm. "You've carried so much." Marilyn stared at her plate, listening to the performance unfold. Guests nodded sympathetically. Compliments drifted around the table like soft lies. Dedicated son, so responsible, so patient. Every word scraped something raw inside her. She felt it building in her chest, a pressure that refused to stay quiet any longer. When the conversation circled back to the farm again, how Eric had found, how he had handled the purchase, Marilyn lifted her head. "That's not true," she said softly. The room fell silent. 8 faces turned toward her. Eric's smile tightened. "Mom, maybe we should." Marilyn stood up. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "You didn't find this farm. I did. And you didn't handle anything." She reached for her purse resting beside the china cabinet and pulled out a folder. The same folder she had placed there earlier. Unsure until this moment whether she'd ever open it, she spread the first document across the table, the purchase contract. "The farm cost $420,000, she said. "Not $750, like you told everyone." Gasps rose around the table. Eric's jaw clenched. "Mom, sit down. You're confused." "No," Marilyn said calmly. She took out the next set of papers, printed emails, handwritten notes, all from Robert's hidden folder. "These are records of the money your father lent you. $120,000. You never paid him back." Melanie's mother inhaled sharply. Melanie's father leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The couples exchanged bewildered glances. Eric shot to his feet. "Why would you embarrass me like this?" he barked. "You don't know what you're talking about." Marilyn didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled her phone from her pocket, pressed a button, and let the recording play. Eric's voice filled the dining room. Raw, calculating, unmistakable. $7,000, and he'll sign whatever we need. "Once she's declared incompetent, the farm is ours. We'll dump her in the cheapest home we can find. She's easy to control." Every sentence hit the room like a thunderclap. Melanie's mother covered her mouth, horrified. Melanie's father stared at his daughter with a look of stunned betrayal. One of the guests pushed his chair back as if distancing himself from the ugliness spilling from the speaker. The air tightened, thick, electric, impossible to ignore. Eric lunged forward, slamming his hand on the table. "Turn that off." But it was too late. The performance had shattered. Masks had fallen. The room no longer saw a devoted son. They saw the truth. And nothing would ever be the same. For a long, stunned moment, no one spoke. The recording still echoed faintly in the room, hanging in the air like a poison cloud that refused to dissipate. Melanie was the first to recover. She leaned forward, hands clasped in practiced sympathy, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. "Everyone, please," she said. "Marilyn, she's confused. This is one of her episodes. We've been dealing with this for months. She misunderstands things, records random conversations, mixes them up." A short, sharp sound cut her off. Marilyn was laughing. Not joyfully, not even angrily. It was a brittle, exhausted, almost feral laugh. One that had been buried under years of silence and obedience, but finally clawed its way out. "An episode," she said. "Melanie, the only thing I'm confused about is how long you thought you could get away with this." Melanie's face flushed. I didn't mean." Eric surged forward, no longer performing, no longer charming. His face twisted with unfiltered rage. "You always do this, Mom. Always. Playing the victim. Making everything about you. Dad spoiled you, and look where that got him." The room tightened around him. A collective recoil. He didn't notice. He kept going, his voice rising. "He spent everything on you. He babied you. And you repay him by turning everyone against me? You're unbelievable." Marilyn didn't move. She simply watched him unravel, piece by piece. Melanie's father, the retired judge, slowly stood. The authority in his posture was unmistakable. "Eric," he said evenly, "sit down." Eric whirled around. "Don't tell me what to do." The judge didn't flinch. "Your mother played only a portion of that recording. I'd like to hear the rest." Marilyn, without a word, pressed play again. More of Eric's voice spilled out. The threats, the nursing home plan, the manipulation, the eagerness to seize the conservatorship. Melanie's harsh agreement. The judge's eyes hardened with every passing second, his jaw tightening in disgust. When the recording ended, he turned to his daughter. "Melanie, you're leaving. Now. Dad, now." Her mother stood beside him, face pale, lips pressed into a tight, furious line. "We raised you better than this," she whispered. The two couples who had come along as guests exchanged hurried glances, murmured weak excuses, and slipped out the door. The cozy dinner atmosphere dissolved entirely, leaving behind an exposed, raw tension that thickened the air. Melanie's parents guided her outside. She didn't look back. Eric remained. He stood in the center of the dining room, chest heaving, eyes burning with a fury that stripped every trace of charm from his face. Without Melanie to perform for, without witnesses to manipulate, he looked different, smaller, yet more dangerous. Disarmed, cornered, enraged. Marilyn felt the truth settle deep within her. This wasn't the first time Eric had shown this side of himself. It was simply the first time he no longer had anyone willing to pretend it wasn't there. The house was silent after the guests' cars disappeared down the gravel drive. Only Eric remained, pacing the dining room like a trapped animal. His anger had settled into something darker, something calculated. Marilyn stood near the doorway, her hands folded calmly in front of her, though her pulse thudded beneath her skin. Eric stopped pacing and turned on her. "You think you ruined my night," he hissed. "You have no idea what you've done. You made me look like an idiot in front of everyone. You embarrassed me. For what? For attention." Marilyn met his glare without flinching. "I didn't embarrass you, Eric. You exposed yourself." He stepped closer, looming over her. "You think you're safe because they walked out? You think you can talk to me like that? You have no idea how badly you've messed up." There was a time when that tone would have made her shrink, apologize, fold into herself. But tonight she felt something different, something steady and unwavering. She walked to the sideboard, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope. "I wanted to tell you this calmly," she said, "but since you're determined to threaten me, you might as well know the truth now." Eric snatched the envelope from her hands and tore it open. He scanned the first page, his brows knitting together in confusion, then fury. "What is this?" he demanded. "My irrevocable living trust," Marilyn said quietly. "I finalized it 2 weeks ago." Eric flipped through the pages, his breaths turning short and sharp. It says the farm isn't yours anymore." "That's correct." "And I'm not. I'm not listed anywhere. I'm not even a beneficiary." "That's also correct." He looked up at her with disbelief that quickly curdled into rage. "You wrote me out? Me, your only son." I protected myself," Marilyn answered. "And your father helped me start the process before he died. He knew things you didn't realize he knew." Eric shook the pages at her. "It says everything goes to charity. A senior abuse organization? Are you kidding me? You're giving away my inheritance." Marilyn's voice remained steady. "You were never owed my life, or my home, or my safety." His face contorted. "You heartless woman. You're a worthless mother." For the first time, Marilyn didn't absorb the blow. It hit the air between them instead, falling flat, losing its power on contact. "This isn't hatred," she said softly. "It's self-respect." Eric stared at her, chest heaving, trying to find the leverage he had always used. But the dynamic had shifted. She wasn't bending. She wasn't begging. She stood like someone who finally understood her own worth. The door opened suddenly, Melanie stepping in from outside, face blotchy from crying. "Eric, let's go," she whispered. "Please." He crumpled the trust papers in his fist, glaring at Marilyn one last time before storming past his wife. Melanie avoided Marilyn's eyes as she followed him out. The door slammed. The house settled into stillness. Marilyn exhaled, feeling the weight of years begin to lift, quietly, but unmistakably. For the first time she had won. The days that followed were a slow descent into something Marilyn had never felt before. Fear that lived in the walls, the windows, the very air of her home. Eric called constantly, not once or twice, but dozens of times a day. When she didn't answer, the voicemails grew darker, sharper, more desperate. "Undo the trust, Mom. You don't know what you're doing. You think this is over? It's not. You owe me. Fix this before it gets worse." At first, Marilyn muted the phone. Then she turned it off entirely. But Eric didn't stop. He started showing up. 2 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, near midnight. He banged on the doors so hard they rattled in their frames, shouting through the porch windows that she had one last chance, that she was ruining everything, that he wouldn't let her throw her life away. Marilyn began locking herself in the bedroom each night, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands clasped tightly together, trying to steady her breathing. The farm had once felt like sanctuary. Now it felt like a target. On the 3rd day, he brought a man in a cheap suit to the door, a middle-aged stranger holding a clipboard. "I have a court order for a psychiatric evaluation," the man announced. Marilyn stayed behind the glass, heart pounding. "Let me see it." The man flashed a single sheet, clearly fake, missing any judge's signature, any court seal. Eric stood beside him, arms crossed, wearing the smug confidence of someone who believed intimidation was the same thing as authority. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Eric said. Marilyn stepped back, locked the door, and dialed her attorney, Daniel Foster. Daniel arrived within an hour. The 2 men had already left by then. But Daniel confirmed what she already knew. There was no court order, no evaluation, no legitimacy, just a bluff. But Eric wasn't finished. The next day, he returned with 2 individuals wearing makeshift badges claiming to be from Adult Protective Services. Their badges were laminated printouts. Their story poorly rehearsed. Daniel later told her APS never arrived unannounced, never without documentation. By then, Marilyn had begun sleeping in short bursts, startled awake by every branch scraping the siding. The breaking point came on the 5th night. She heard the crack of shattering glass, sharp, violent, unmistakable. The kitchen window. The cost would later be assessed at around $3,200. But in that moment, all she felt was raw terror. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor. Male voices muttered, close to the hallway. Eric and others. Marilyn slipped into her bedroom closet, knees pulled to her chest, hands covering her mouth to silence her breathing. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared it would give her away. Across town, Daniel received an alert from the security system he had insisted on installing. He opened the live camera feed and saw Eric climbing through the broken window. Daniel called the police immediately. The sirens arrived minutes later, washing the fields in red and blue light. Officers stormed the house. Eric shouted. Melanie cried. 2 hired men tried to run. They were all arrested, trespassing, harassment, attempted forced entry, property damage. When the officers escorted them away, Marilyn remained in the closet a few seconds longer, trembling, letting the truth settle through her shaking breaths. She wasn't safe, but she was no longer alone. In the days that followed the break-in, Marilyn moved through her home like someone relearning how to breathe. Every window had been repaired, every piece of shattered glass swept away, but the memory of that night lingered like dust in the corners. Daniel handled the immediate legal steps, reassuring her that she was safe. And for the first time in weeks, she believed him. Eric and Melanie were charged formally: trespassing, harassment, property damage, and attempted forced entry. The two hired men faced their own charges. Eric's lawyer pushed hard for leniency, citing stress, family conflict, and miscommunications, but none of it softened the facts recorded on Marilyn's security cameras. In the end, the court sentenced Eric to 1 year of probation, mandatory counseling, and a fine. It wasn't prison, but it was accountability, something he had never faced before. Melanie, terrified of facing the same consequences, chose cooperation. Her confession was exhaustive. She told investigators everything Eric had planned: how he intended to drug Marilyn's tea to make her seem confused during a psychiatric evaluation, how he had hired a physician willing to fabricate cognitive decline documents, how he meant to obtain conservatorship and liquidate the farm immediately. Melanie's voice shook as she recounted it. She seemed horrified, not just by the crimes, but by how easily she had gone along with them. Her parents came to see Marilyn a week later. They arrived quietly, without the grand entrance of their first visit. Melanie's mother held a tin of homemade cookies, her hands trembling. Her father removed his hat the moment Marilyn opened the door. "We are deeply sorry," he said, his voice low and sincere. "We failed to see what was happening, and we failed you." Marilyn accepted their apology with grace, not because she owed them forgiveness, but because she refused to carry bitterness any longer. She had survived too much to keep holding weight that didn't belong to her. With Daniel's guidance, she filed for, and was granted, a permanent no-contact order against Eric and Melanie. Legally, they were barred from approaching her, calling her, or stepping foot on her property ever again. The order felt like a final boundary drawn around a part of her life that had rotted long before she realized it. In the evenings, Marilyn sat on the porch and watched the wind ripple across the fields. The house, once a symbol of hope, had become a battleground. But now, slowly, it was shifting back into something gentler, something she could claim again. She thought of Eric sometimes, not with longing, not with anger, but with a quiet, aching clarity. She realized she no longer expected him to change, no longer hoped for the son she once imagined he could be. The emotional thread that had bound her to him for so many years had thinned, frayed, and finally snapped. She wasn't celebrating his downfall. She wasn't mourning, either. She was simply letting go. And for the first time, letting go felt like freedom. Spring settled gently over Madison County, softening the winter-hard fields and filling the air with the scent of new grass. For weeks, Marilyn had walked the perimeter of her land each morning, watching the frost retreat, watching the soil come back to life. And as the farm awakened, something within her began awakening too. She no longer checked the driveway for headlights. She no longer jumped at every sound. The fear that had lived in her bones was slowly dissolving, leaving room for something else: clarity, purpose, a direction she hadn't expected. It began with a simple thought: I survived because someone helped me. And then, who helps the women who have no one? Marilyn spoke to Daniel about it during one of their regular check-ins, sitting at the kitchen table. She explained her idea. She wanted to use the trust's remaining funds to transform part of the farm into a refuge for older women like her, women who had been mistreated, ignored, or pushed aside by the very people meant to love them. Daniel listened carefully, then smiled in a way she hadn't seen before, proud, almost moved. "It's more than possible," he said. "It's exactly what Robert would have wanted you to do with your life. And legally, the trust can support it." Within weeks, paperwork was filed, licenses approved, a small team assembled. Marilyn cleaned out the old barn loft and converted it into a cozy multipurpose room. Daniel oversaw the financial structure. Contractors helped prepare 3 guest cabins on the edge of the property. And then the women arrived. Margaret came first, a 68-year-old retired teacher whose son had abandoned her 3 states away. She carried only 1 suitcase and a quiet heartbreak. Marilyn showed her to her cabin, and for the first time in months, Margaret slept through the night. Elaine arrived next, a former accountant whose daughter had drained her savings by convincing banks she was helping. Elaine moved cautiously, as if expecting the world to collapse beneath her feet. Marilyn placed her in charge of small bookkeeping tasks. The numbers steadied her hands, grounded her. Rose came last, a gentle woman with silver hair who had been drugged by her own daughter to keep her compliant. Rose barely spoke at first, her voice thin and uncertain. Marilyn invited her to tend a garden bed beside the porch. Rose's hands remembered the soil before her mind did. As the days passed, the farm began transforming again, not as a place of fear, but as a circle of women learning to reclaim pieces of their lives. Margaret planted rows of vegetables. Elaine led small finance workshops at the kitchen table. Rose taught literacy lessons to adults from the nearby town. Laughter returned to the farm. Lights glowed warmly from each cabin at dusk. The place felt lived in, beautifully, gently, honestly lived in. One evening, Marilyn stood at the edge of the porch, watching the women talk around the fire pit. The flames reflected in their faces. Faces marked by hardship, yes, but also by strength. By survival, by the possibility of something new. She realized then, with a quiet certainty, that she had built more than a refuge. She had built a home, a purpose, a life shaped not by what hurt her, but by what she chose to heal. Months passed, and the farm settled into a steady rhythm of quiet mornings and lantern-lit evenings. The cabins glowed warmly at dusk, each window holding a fragment of a life being gently rebuilt. Marilyn often stood on the porch at night, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, listening to the soft chorus of laughter or conversation drifting across the property. It grounded her. It reminded her why she had survived. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by unannounced. He stood on the porch with the same careful expression he used when delivering news he wished he didn't have to share. "Marilyn," he began gently, "I got a call today. From Eric's therapist." Marilyn felt something shift, a small, instinctive tightening in her chest. "Go on." "He says Eric wants to meet with you. Claims he wants to apologize. Says therapy has been helping him see things differently." Daniel didn't embellish. He didn't push. He simply laid the facts at her feet, letting her decide what to do with them. Marilyn nodded slowly, absorbing the words. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel longing. Only a quiet, contemplative stillness. In another life, another version of herself, she might have rushed toward the chance for reconciliation. She might have believed that pain could be undone by a single apology. But her life was not built around might have anymore. Later that evening, she walked the property alone, past the cabins where Margaret and Elaine and Rose were preparing dinner together. She heard the hum of their voices through open windows, the warmth, the safety, the togetherness. Each of them had been betrayed by someone they loved. Each had tried to reconcile too many times, only to be hurt again. Cycles of abuse didn't break themselves. Someone had to choose to stop turning the wheel. Marilyn paused beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the property, her breath forming pale clouds in the cooling air. She thought about the boy Eric once was, the promises Robert once held for him, the grief that had blinded her to the truth for too long. She thought about all she had endured, all she had rebuilt. She did not wish him harm, but she no longer wished for closeness either. The next morning, she called Daniel. "I've made my decision," she said softly. Daniel didn't speak. He simply listened. "Please tell Eric," she took a breath, steady and calm. "Tell him I forgive him. Truly. But I won't be meeting with him. And I won't be reopening that door. My life is here now. Are you sure? Daniel asked gently. Yes, she replied. I'm choosing peace, not a second chance to be hurt. That evening, Marilyn stepped onto the porch once more. The sky blushed with fading pink light. The cabins glowed steadily across the fields like constellations rooted in the earth. Margaret's laughter drifted through the air. Elaine's voice followed. Rose stepped outside to light the lanterns along the path. Marilyn watched them, the women who had arrived broken and frightened, now living with dignity and courage. Women who had, unknowingly, given her the same. She had lost a son, but she had found dignity. She had found community. She had found a chosen family, and in the quiet glow of the farm she had built, she realized she was finally fully home.